Hi everyone, I'm Pranav. In this video, I'm going to introduce our paper DISCERN, Designing Decision Support Interfaces to Investigate the Complexities of Workplace Social Decision Making with Line Managers. This is joint work with Lindy, Kate, Shamsi, and Jina for Microsoft Research. Within many social institutions, the task of choosing one course of action over another falls on individual decision makers with relevant knowledge, expertise, or authority. Within HCI research, there's been growing interest in how digital tools can support this social decision making, where a decision maker must reason about or make predictions about the intentions, beliefs, and behaviors of other people. And prior work has studied social decision making and how to support it in diverse domains, ranging from high stakes decisions such as those in criminal justice and social work to content moderation decisions and even civic decision making. And just to give you a sense of the setting we're working under, these are decisions where no one course of action is clearly better than the others, and choice often depends on what values are prioritized. For example, a civic decision maker might be considering different public service initiatives and might have to balance a list of costs and benefits to many stakeholders and trying to make a final decision. And careful analysis can quickly overwhelm a decision maker. So to support social decision maker, prior work has come up with a set of design approaches to sort of support this. And this includes tools to digitally elicit stakeholder perspectives, visual analytic systems to help decision makers numerically represent competing values, and forecasting systems to help decision makers anticipate likely outcomes. Now, each of these tools embodies a certain premise about how to support decision making. So, for instance, the first set of tools, the premise is that stakeholders' perspectives often form the base on which decision makers' value clarification and forecasting activities are enacted. And so tools that digitally elicit those perspectives and datafy them can help speed up decision making. Similarly, the premise underlying the second set of tools is that quantifying values, however much they resist quantification, is often necessary when you're trying to rank course of action. And so tools that let you do that can help you speed up decision making. And finally, the premise underlying the third class of tools is that uncertain outcomes is what makes decisions hard. And so tools that help you forecast outcomes can help you make decisions. So that's a quick summary of the state of design knowledge and supporting social decision making. And this is the body of knowledge to which we hope to contribute. So our social decision making context, or the question we were interested in answering, was how might digital tools support line managers making decisions within their teams? And this was motivated by the fact that there's been growing interest in how digital tools can support workplace decision making. So we were working with one organization that is interested in exploring such supports, and specifically we are interested in supporting line managers. The reason for this is that line managers make up as much as 60% of the management ranks of most workplaces, and they supervise as much as 80% of the workforce. And there's growing excitement about designing decision supports at the level of line management decisions. Yet, as recent work argues, little is understood about the needs and opportunities of organizational decision makers, especially at these lower levels. But line managers are also an interesting domain in which to study social decision making. This is because, by and large, HCI research on social decision making so far has studied decisions marked by a level of social detachment, such that the decision maker doesn't have close ongoing relationships with the people they're expected to judge and decide for. In many situations, this detachment is actually intended. For instance, it's desirable that the expert content moderator not be worried by their relationship with the person posting offending content. In other cases, it may be the consequence of organizational scale. For instance, a civic decision maker may not be able to interact with every person impacted by their decision. But line managers do maintain close ongoing relationships with the people they're asked to decide for. And when decision makers are closer to the targets of their decisions, they may be concerned by how their decisions may impact those relationships. Relational considerations can also affect stakeholders when they're expressing their perspectives and preferences. And finally, in these more intimate settings, decision making can also be more interactional and deliberative when compared to more socially detached decision making, where you can only elicit stakeholder perspectives at discrete points in times. So a study of line managers provides us the opportunity to evaluate premises reified in prior work under new context. It allows us to explore the implications of their success and failure for the design of supports for social decision making more generally. In this paper, we present findings from our iterative design research that was aimed at understanding how line managers make decisions within their teams and identifying if and how digital tools can support it. We report on a series of design activities conducted with line managers in a large tech company, reflecting on our activities, designed artifacts, managers' responses to our design choices, and the design opportunities they and we identified. And we conclude with a set of implications. So our formative work included surveys with 57 managers, 11 of whom participated in follow-up interviews. And our goals in this formative work were to understand managers' current practices for gathering, organizing, and analyzing decision-making information, and to start identifying opportunities to support current practices. To summarize our observations, we found that managers use different means to actively listen to stakeholders, resulting in information both qualitative and quantitative that spanned written and verbal discourse. To weigh qualitative and quantitative information within the context of different objectives, they often created makeshift structures such as comparison tables or pros and cons lists on spreadsheets and notepads. However, managers use these materials opportunistically, leaving them with the choice to use either structured representations like spreadsheets, intended to hold data to reason about higher level objectives, or to use more expressive mediums like notepads that are severed from the data. Finally, we found that decision-making progressed iteratively, whereby opinions and consensus was sought at intermediate points. However, managers found it challenging to create representations to anchor these intermediate discussions and record their conclusions, and this made it hard for them to provide retrospective explanations for their decision. To understand managers' preferences for tool support, we generated 3 design concepts. These concepts were generated to address needs that are surfacing in the survey and were inspired by 3 premises we identified in prior work. Concept 1 is a tool that automatically generates and administers surveys. Concept 2 is a visual environment to author multi-attribute objectives, reflect, and plan. And concept 3 is a tool that simulates stakeholder opinions as real-time proxies of team members' feedback. We use these concepts to see how strongly participants identified with the issues they tried to address and whether they felt the underlying assumptions were appropriate. To summarize our findings from managers' reactions to our concepts, first, we found that even though significant decision-making effort was spent digitizing and organizing verbal exchanges with stakeholders, managers consistently rejected the idea of tools that would digitally source this input. This is because when sourcing judgments from their team, managers described enacting rich conversational scripts to make judgments beyond what was said. Managers also believed that stakeholders providing information digitally wouldn't feel heard. Managers' reactions to our concept suggest a desire for tools that support but don't obviate active listening. Rather than automating listening, managers wanted help identifying focal points in conversation. In their own practice, managers often craft makeshift representations to identify where to direct their attention. They also gravitated towards the idea of having externalized representations as a way to guide their information-seeking activities. Therefore, we decided to narrow our exploration to representation materials that would allow managers to externalize and reason about their decisions. In response to concept 2, many managers noted how such a tool would help them understand and reason about different objectives involved, but they also wanted to be able to link these to the evidence. That is, they valued abstract representations to reason about objectives, but also wanted to dive deeper. This feedback is consistent with how managers iterate on a decision by decomposing it into tractable parts, and suggests that representations could support representing a decision at different levels of resolution. Even though managers were receptive to tools to help reason about higher level objectives, 8 of the 11 managers disliked Concept 2's numerical approach. They wanted different materials to express decisions at different levels of resolution. Visual non-numerical material to represent objectives, and tabular calculation structures to hold and process lower level data after it had been quantified. Yet this very need is what results in their current frustrations of having to copy over or directly express higher level objectives in spreadsheets. Therefore, we explored the idea of using distinct but linked materials to represent different decision levels of objectives and data. Based on our formative work, we developed a technology probe we call DISCERN. DISCERN has 2 main functions motivated by our formative work. It supports the externalization of multi-level decisions as a tree artifact, and at each node of the tree, it provides both visual representations to support reasoning about objectives and a linked tabular representation to hold and reason about data. Because managers are already comfortable using spreadsheets for data recording and analysis, DISCERN uses spreadsheets as its tabular representation, and so it's an Excel extension that augments spreadsheets with visual encodings to reason about and manipulate objectives. We leverage this technology probe to challenge our ideas and generate new questions for the design of decision representation tools, rather than committing to a specific design directions that managers may not ultimately desire. And before we can get to that, let me quickly show you the tool. So this is what DISCERN looks like in Excel. Let's say a manager is trying to decide which day of the week should be remote work day for their team, and they're considering Monday to Friday. Maybe they've also figured out that what ought to matter in this decision is the productivity impact their choice will have and people's personal constraints. So as you can see, on the right, DISCERN provides a visual encoding of these high-level objectives, and on the left, it provides a tabular representation to reason about each of these days along those objectives. These visual encodings allow the manager to maybe express different levels of importance for each of these attributes of objective. And it also allows you to break these down further. So for instance, let's say we want to break down productivity impact further into impact on meetings with collaborators and impact on maybe weekly rhythm. Now, when you click Save and Sync to Sheet, you'll notice that the spreadsheet updates with a new table for this new sub-objective that we've broken down further. And this is what we mean when we say DISCERN gives you a multi-resolution representation of your decision, because now you can sort of zoom in on just productivity impact and reason about it independently, and then come up and reason about your larger decision. And so at every level, there is this visual encoding as well as a tabular structure. So with DISCERN, we had 3 goals. First, we wanted to investigate when and how managers wanted to externalize their decision-making processes and share externalized representations of their decision. Second, we wanted to evaluate whether a tree representation and a visual language for manipulating it make it easier to reason about higher-level objectives than spreadsheets alone. And third, we wanted to understand how DISCERN supported our complicated managers' needs. So we pursued these goals in the context of user enactments. We recruited 4 managers to participate in these user enactments. Each of these managers was paired with 4 actors role-playing as their team. Each manager was asked to perform 2 decision-making tasks, decide the remote work day of the week for their team, and decide quiet hours of the day for their team. One of the goals of our study was to evaluate whether DISCERN made it easier to reflect on higher-level objectives for making decisions. Therefore, we presented participants with 2 tools during the enactment, Excel with and without DISCERN, one to be used for each of the 2 decisions. The enactments proceeded through 2 sessions. In the first session, planning, managers had to use the artifact provided to them to freely externalize their decision-making process for each of the decisions. So that would be Excel for one decision and Excel with DISCERN for the other decision. And in the second event, meeting, the participant was asked to use the artifacts that they had created in the first session to engage in a discussion with the 4 team members and incorporate their input to arrive at a final decision for each of the 2 decision-making tasks. Through this, we found that DISCERN provided a more expressive medium to iterate on and understand objectives. All participants mentioned they found it easier to express objectives using DISCERN than when just using spreadsheets. We found that managers did not want to purely calculate or broadcast calculation. Participants varied in their desire to perform and communicate objectivity or quantification. We found that fuzzily explicated objectives enabled compromise. One noticeable tension that DISCERN and the spreadsheets created was that they made objectives and decision-making processes seem finalized. And we observed some managers develop strategies to work around this when they wanted to communicate that the decision-making was malleable. So for instance, some managers chose to abandon the tables altogether and instead began by simply asking team members what their constraints were, using free-form notes within the spreadsheets to record responses. So to summarize, our formative work revealed how managers did not want tools that would obviate their face-to-face interactions with stakeholders, but rather wanted representations to simply hold and reason about what they had heard. Based on our findings, we developed DISCERN, which we used as a technology probe in our user enactments, which further revealed how managers wanted tools that would allow flexibility in formalization and allow for fuzzily explicated objectives. Our work makes an empirical contribution to literature on social decision-making by providing an account of social decision-making in more intimate settings than those previously studied. In particular, our studies describe the relational considerations underpinning the decision-making practices of line managers that we suggest are likely to be present in other decision-making contexts where the maintenance of relationships is important. Our work also makes an empirical contribution to literature on information management and visual analytics in the workplace by presenting the unmet communication and analysis needs of line managers. Here, our work provides one more piece of evidence that current tools are not flexible enough to support the way decision-making progresses iteratively. These observations lend support to previous calls to look beyond data analysis and forecasting systems to include tools for interactional decision-making as greater priorities. We also suggest that a sole focus on highly formalized decisions and their precise mathematical modeling may overlook many other decisions in organizations that may be less formalized, but that may still benefit from some level of technological support. Finally, we suggest that representations intended to anchor deliberations, at least in early stages, can benefit from a layer of fuzziness or ambiguity. For more details, we invite you to read the paper. Thank you for watching this video.